theme of the service this morning is being in tune with God. And we're going to be thinking about what that means and how we can put it into practice. We'll start with an opening prayer to just focus our thoughts. Let's pray. Creator God, you made this a marvellous world and has given us the wonder of life to enjoy. Please help us this morning to discover more about how you created life to be and share this more deeply so that our lives, the lives of others, and your heart may be filled with joy. Amen. Amen. Ella is now going to come and share with us our Bible reading. Thank you, Ella.
The Bible reading is from Ephesians chapter 5. Be imitators of God and try to be like him in everything you do. Just as children have good behaviour from their parents, live a life filled with love for others, following the example of Jesus, who loved you and gave himself for you. It's God's way you should be in tune with, not the distorted ways of living people come up with. For though your hearts were once full of darkness, now you are full of light from God. So live like children who belong to the light. Living in the light produces what is good, right and true. This is how you should live. Try to learn what pleases God and do it. This is the word of the Lord.
That is the Lord. Thank you. The Bible reading that Ella shared with us so beautifully speaks about God's desire for us all to live the way that he intended for us. And one way we could describe living the kind of life God designed us for is being in tune with God, following his leading in our lives by saying and doing what God intends. But maybe that's not so easy to get our heads around, so let's look at what it looks like in practice. I'd like you to think for a moment of an orchestra. An orchestra is made up of many different instruments, and when they play together, they're following a piece of music written by the composer, and the composer knows how all the different parts fit together. The violins are playing one melody, the brass section's playing another. They're not all playing at the same time, but they're all interacting together. And each member of the orchestra needs to play the part of the piece of music which has been written for them. When they do that, it sounds wonderful. But if everyone in the orchestra decided they were just going to do their own thing, play their own tune, whatever they fancied, it's going to mess things up, isn't it? Frankly, it would sound pretty awful. Now, I think this idea of an orchestra is a really good image of the way God designed the world, and in particular, how he intends our lives as Christians and as a church to work. The key thing is, we need to play the tune that God intends for us. And when we do, things come together in a wonderful, harmonious way, just like an orchestra playing a beautiful symphony together. But if we don't, if we're out of step, if we're intent on playing our own tune, things tend to fall apart. We might be able to keep doing our own thing, and frankly that's what a lot of people in the world do. We only have to look at the news to see the effects of people doing their own thing. But when we do that, things won't come together in a harmonious and rewarding way as God intended. Well, let's have a look at another image. Cookery. If when we're cooking, we don't follow any kind of recipe, unless we're exceptionally talented, it's probably not going to turn out very well. If you just grab whatever comes to hand and stick it in whatever proportions you think might work, if it comes together in a tasty way, you're probably very lucky. But if you want something really tasty, certainly if you want any Michelin stars, you need to be following a recipe. That recipe tells you what ingredients are needed, what the proportions are, and then when you follow that, put it in the oven for the correct amount of time, you're going to get the best results. But if you just chuck everything in, it's almost certainly going to be a bit of a mess. And in the same way, if we follow what we might call God's recipe for life, it's going to produce a good result. But if we do our own thing, it's probably going to be a bit yucky. One more metaphor or image the Bible uses for the Christian life relates it to being in the army. And the important thing about this is that soldiers in the army don't just do whatever they fancy. They follow orders from an officer. And that officer sees the big picture. He's got instructions from above. So he knows what they should be doing. He coordinates things. And for things to turn out well, it's essential to work to this overall strategy. Not just dive in randomly with everybody doing their own individual thing. Different soldiers in a unit work as a team. They each perhaps have different roles. They certainly have to work together. And then if you look at the army as a whole, the different regiments in the army perform different functions. But they're all designed to come together in an effective way, but only when they all follow the directions from above. Just like an orchestra, where different instruments play different sections of the music, different melodies, but according to how the composer wrote it and the conductor directs them. And this, I think, is what it's like for us as Christians. God intends for each of us to play a part in his plans. Each of us is like an instrument in the orchestra. And we need to play the piece of music that God writes for us. And when we do, the beautiful world that God created, the harmony and well-being of what we call the kingdom of God becomes a reality. But in order for that to happen, we need two things. First of all, we need to listen to what God is saying to us. To use the music analogy, we have to follow the score, play the tune. And that highlights the second thing. It's not just enough to hear what God says to us, we actually have to put it into action. We have to follow the directions he gives us. Because each of us, just doing our own thing, whatever we think best, can result in chaos. Or to use the music metaphor, noisy chaos. But when we play together, according to God's tune for our lives, beautiful things happen, just like a beautiful symphony. That's what the Bible reading we had earlier is telling us. We need to recognise and follow the ways that God intends for us. Not just do whatever we fancy or whatever we think is best. This is what it means to be in tune with God. You could say that we need to play the tune that God, the composer, intended, and not just bash away at any old notes. And when we each live as God intended for us, life is a beautiful harmony. And that way we can discover a truly satisfying and fulfilling lives. We'll be at peace, we'll be fulfilled, we'll be blessed. And more than that, we'll bless others. It will be good for everyone. So, let's live in tune with God's design and how he intends for us to live. Because that's when we make beautiful music together, when we're in tune with God.